Hello plant lovers and welcome to Ground Orchid Week here on my little channel. The reason being because it's spring and they've all come into bloom, so I thought we might have a little chat about basic care for these three types of ground orchids that I've got blooming now. Context then, it's spring here in Australia. I'm in Melbourne in southern Australia, which is a temperate climate, a little bit like a climate zone 10 in the US and parts of the southeast of England. Cold damp winters, no freezing, fairly hot, sometimes extreme summers, so bit of everything. Essentially, these are a cold or a temperate orchid. First cab off the rank then is these Pleione orchids. Aren't they beautiful? And the flower is just very orchid-like, which is a silly thing to say. But anyway, I was very fortunate once and saw these in bloom growing wild on a mountaintop in Cambodia, as you do, and always loved them. And I saw them then at a garden fair here in Melbourne and thought, you know what? I think I need those. And here they are. So a spring bloomer. Let's look at basic care. Firstly, yes, it is a cool growing orchid. You can easily grow them in a pot depending on where you are. But in southern Australia, here in Melbourne, I actually think you could plant these outdoors because the temperature doesn't get too cold in winter. Whatever it is though, they like a free draining medium. Like most bulbs and tubers and rhizomes, they are prone to rot if they get too wet. So bear that in mind. So what I've got in this pot is a free draining, pretty generic orchid mix actually. And I planted the bulbs fairly close to the surface and I just left it outside in dappled light under cover so I could control the watering until the shoots came up, and then I just started to give it a little bit of diluted liquid feed. I did also mix a tiny amount of slow release fertilizer into the medium when I potted them up. The thing about these orchids is that once the bulb has flowered, it actually dies, but it produces lots of pups around it, and they're the ones that you need to take care of for the following year. So from each bulb, you should get 2 or 3 little bulblets, each of which will flower, so that's kind of good value. And these bulbs are reasonably inexpensive. Here in Australia, they were about $5 each for me, which means you can afford to take a risk if you wonder whether they can work outdoors in your climate. Other than that, fairly simple, cool growing. I left them outside while they started to shoot, and then I've just brought them inside to enjoy the flowers. Not wildly long lasting, probably a couple of weeks, but as it's a bulb and you can dry it out, it doesn't really matter about storage. You don't have to maintain the plant for the rest of the year. So let it all die down, and then the mother bulb that's flowered will die, and then you need to be very careful about the little bulblets that are around it. They're the things that you need to save because you'll be planting those the next year. So give Pleione orchids a go if you can find them where you are. No fragrance, but they are beautiful, and they do work really well if you can get as many bulbs as you can packed into the pot. I didn't put nearly enough in here. I probably should have doubled the amount, so then you just have this burst of flowers. They all tend to flower at the same time, so it looks really wonderful. Okay, next cab off the rank, although I said these are all Chinese ground orchids, this one isn't, it's Japanese. And this one is called a Calanthe, Calanthe aristulifera. I will put the name in a box, but there is the name for you, written in my own fair hand. Now these are tuberous. This is a Japanese woodland plant. So again, it is a cool, cold growing orchid. It likes woodland settings, so dappled light, not direct sun. And again, with all tuberous bulby things, just be careful that it doesn't get too wet. I've got this in the garden under a tree, so it does get natural rainfall. And in summer, I might just make sure that the soil doesn't dry out completely. The leaves start to shoot late winter, very early spring, and there we have this beautiful spray of white blooms. And again, no fragrance, but it's a beautiful orchid. These make great potted specimens too, so don't worry if you've got nowhere to plant it, because you can certainly keep it in a pot, as have I. I think the thing to do though is make sure you get a fairly reasonably sized pot to start with, and then you can just leave it to increase. And these will clump over time. This particular species though is pretty slow at clumping, but over a number of years you will end up getting more and more bloom spikes as it gets older. Again, very simple. I actually put this in a basic potting mix that's free draining, and I mixed a little bit of slow release fertilizer into the soil at the time. Other than that, just make sure that it doesn't dry out, but don't overwater it. And when you start to see the leaf shoots coming up, maybe give it a couple of doses of a liquid feed and a diluted mixture every now and then, just to give it that little fillip. But it's really beautiful. And there are hybrids of these around as well. And there are these kind of tuberous orchids from all parts of the world, from South America, from Southern Africa, and from Australia as well. So I've got a few that are doing other things which might bloom later on. So we'll check in with those. Quite tough, quite easy to grow. You could grow it outside if your climate was suitable, and you can certainly grow them inside in a pot. Again, dappled light, no direct sunlight, don't overwater it, don't let it dry out. And then finally, this baby here, which is the classic Chinese ground orchid, which is called Bletilla striata. Basically the same care instructions, dappled light, nothing too strong. This actually has quite a large tuber, and I have to say I did buy it 3 years ago, and this is the first year it's flowered, so I am very excited. So the tuber obviously takes a bit of time either to settle in or to be mature enough to bloom. So be patient. So for the last 2 years, I've had a beautiful strappy leaf. And then this year I saw the flower bud and I was so thrilled. And it has sent up a new shoot. So clearly the tuber has started to multiply down below. Now I have this in a pot, as you can see, because it has lived with me on balconies and many a move, and it's quite happy as a potted specimen, as all of them are. But this, again, you could plant out. I could certainly plant this outside in Melbourne, where our winters aren't extreme. It doesn't really ever get below freezing in the city. So again, check your local environment as to the hardiness of these, and just see if someone else is growing them. Essentially, woodland plant, dappled sunlight, not too wet, otherwise the tuber can rot. But this beautiful show of flowers, and it will clump up over time again. But these are not that expensive either. If you are willing to take a risk, you could maybe buy a few of the tubers and plant them in a tight clump in your garden. But they are stunning. Such a beautiful color. And again, I think there are lots of hybrids of these around, so you can see what else is available in your neck of the woods. With all of these, I would buy them out of season, which is generally in summer when the plant is dormant and it's just easier for it to be shipped to you. But I bought my first Pleiones when they were actually in bloom, because there's a huge variety of color and form and shape. So that just gave me an indication of what they were going to look like. But again, it's kind of easier just to buy the bulbs and plant them. Again, I'd be buying those in early winter, potting them up, and then they'll start to shoot by the end of winter, early spring. There we are, plant lovers. Very simple. All these ground orchids are really gorgeous, and they will naturalize in the wild if you've got the right environment, but they also work very well indoors in pots. As you can see, they're quite elegant, super easy. The only thing is to remember not to get them too wet because it will rot, but that's the same as any bulbs. As far as orchids go, I think these are very low maintenance and very rewarding because the colors and the forms are just sensational. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that. See if you can find some in your area, wherever you are, give them a go. They are so easy that even if you're terrified of the thought of growing orchids, you should be able to manage these. If you can grow any bulb in a pot, tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, you'll be able to grow these, so go for it. Thank you for watching. I'm making all these films because I just found it quite hard to find information that was specific to my area about all sorts of orchids and plants, so I hope it has been of use to you no matter where you might be. Thanks for watching, thanks for hitting like, thanks for subscribing, and I might see you next week with some Australian native orchids that are in bloom right now. Bye.